In coastal Oregon, a 72-year-old retired librarian was about to discover her own children were slowly poisoning her. What started as peaceful morning gardening took a shocking turn when mysterious dizzy spells revealed a deadly family conspiracy. Emily John wasn't your typical elderly widow. For 40 years, she had honed her ability to read people and uncover hidden truths as Seaside's head librarian. When her adult children began bringing meals and organizing medications, she had no idea she was walking into a murder plot. Emily's sharp instincts would lead to a desperate fight for survival against those she loved most, until a vigilant doctor became her unexpected lifeline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Oregon coastline like a familiar embrace as Emily John stepped onto her back porch, coffee mug warming her weathered hands. 5 years of widowhood had taught her to savor these quiet moments before the day demanded her attention. The salt air carried memories of Harold's laughter, of children's voices calling from the beach below their clifftop home. Now, at 72, she found peace in the rhythm of waves against rock, in the certainty of routine. She had always prided herself on her sharp mind. 40 years as head librarian at Seaside Public Library had honed her ability to notice details others missed. Patterns in borrowing habits, the way patrons' eyes shifted when they lied about overdue books, the subtle tells that revealed more than words ever could. That same observational skill had served her well in raising David and Lisa as a single mother after Harold's heart attack when the children were barely teenagers. But lately, something felt off. The dizzy spell hit without warning as she knelt among her prized dahlias, Harold's favorite flowers that she'd tended religiously since his passing. The garden seemed to tilt sideways, the rich Oregon soil rushing toward her face before she caught herself against the weathered fence post. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she steadied herself, waiting for the world to right itself. "Just need more coffee," she murmured, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. At 72, she supposed some slowing down was inevitable. Harold had always joked that she'd outlive them all through sheer stubbornness. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted her thoughts. David's pickup truck pulled into her driveway, an unexpected sight on a Tuesday morning. Her son emerged with his familiar easy smile, the one that had charmed teachers and gotten him out of trouble more times than she could count. At 48, he still carried himself with the confidence of someone who expected the world to bend to his will. "Morning, Mom." He lifted a thermal container from the passenger seat. "Brought you some soup. That minestrone you used to make when we were kids. Took me 3 tries to get it right." Emily's chest warmed, despite her lingering unsteadiness. Since Harold's death, both children had become more attentive, but David's visits had increased dramatically in recent weeks. "That's sweet of you, honey. But you didn't need to drive all the way out here." "Course I did." David's arm slipped around her shoulders, steadying her as they walked toward the house. "You're all I've got left, Mom. Dad made me promise to look after you." The kitchen still smelled faintly of her morning toast as David bustled about, heating the soup and setting out bowls with practiced efficiency. His movements were confident, almost proprietary, as if he belonged here more than she did. Emily settled into her favorite chair at the kitchen table, the one that faced the window overlooking her garden. "You look tired," David observed, ladling soup into her bowl. "Been sleeping okay?" "Just some dizzy spells," Emily admitted. "Probably nothing." David's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Dizzy spells? How long has this been going on?" "A few weeks. Maybe I should see Dr. Brennan." "Maybe you should." His voice carried an odd intensity. "In fact, I think that's a great idea. Want me to drive you?" Emily studied her son's face. Something flickered behind his eyes. Concern, certainly, but something else too. "I can drive myself, David. I'm not helpless." "I know that." His smile returned, warm and reassuring. "Just thought you might want the company." The soup was delicious, rich with vegetables and herbs that reminded her of countless family dinners around this same table. David had always been her more attentive child, quick with hugs and gifts, while Lisa tended toward pragmatic gestures. But lately, Both children seemed determined to prove their devotion. As if summoned by her thoughts, Lisa's silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. Through the window, Emily watched her daughter emerge carrying grocery bags, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon light. Even at 44, Lisa maintained the polished appearance that had served her well in real estate, every detail calculated to inspire confidence. "Looks like I'm popular today," Emily murmured. Lisa's heels clicked against the hardwood as she entered, immediately assessing the scene with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to reading rooms and people. "David? I didn't expect to see you here." "Brought Mom some soup." David's tone carried a subtle edge. "She's been having dizzy spells." Lisa's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that might have been alarm. "Dizzy spells? Mom, why didn't you call me?" "It's nothing serious." Emily felt suddenly overwhelmed by their combined attention. "Just getting old, I suppose." "Don't say that." Lisa began unpacking groceries with brisk efficiency. "I brought your favorites. That herbal tea you like, the good crackers from the farmer's market. And I picked up your prescription refills while I was at the pharmacy." Emily frowned. "I don't remember asking you to." "I called in the refills yesterday. Dr. Brennan's office said it was time." Lisa's movements were quick, nervous. "Thought I'd save you a trip." The siblings exchanged a glance, quick, almost furtive, that sent an inexplicable chill down Emily's spine. In 48 years of motherhood, she'd learned to read her children's moods like weather patterns. But this felt different. Foreign. "That's very thoughtful," Emily said carefully. "Both of you have been so attentive lately." "We love you, Mom." David's hand covered hers across the table. "After Dad, we realized how precious family time is." Lisa nodded emphatically as she organized Emily's medication bottles with practiced efficiency. "I was thinking I could set up a pill organizer for you. Make sure you don't miss any doses." "I've been managing my own medications for 72 years, Emily said with gentle humor, but neither child smiled. "It's just that, with the dizzy spells." Lisa's voice trailed off as she lined up pill bottles in perfect rows. "We want to make sure you're taking everything correctly." Emily watched her daughter's manicured fingers sort through the bottles. Blood pressure medication, vitamins, calcium supplements. All familiar, all prescribed by Dr. Brennan. Yet something about Lisa's intensity made her uneasy. "I should probably get going," David announced, rising from the table. "Early day tomorrow." Emily knew better than to ask about his work. David's construction business had struggled for years, a fact he was sensitive about. Lately, his visits often coincided with meals, and she'd noticed him eyeing her financial statements when he thought she wasn't looking. "Thanks for the soup, honey. There's plenty more where that came from." David kissed her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "Make sure you eat it all. You're too thin." After he left, Lisa continued organizing the kitchen with the same methodical approach she brought to staging houses for sale. Every movement was purposeful, efficient, but her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the medication bottles. "Lisa, are you all right? You seem nervous." "Just tired." Lisa's laugh sounded forced. "Tom's been working late, the kids have been impossible, and this market." She shook her head. "Sometimes I wonder if we're all just pretending everything's fine when, really, we're all drowning." The moment of vulnerability surprised Emily. Lisa rarely showed cracks in her composed facade. "Is everything okay with you and Tom?" "Of course." The professional mask snapped back into place. "We're fine. Everyone's fine." But Emily had spent decades reading people, and her daughter's eyes told a different story. Fear lived there, sharp and desperate, carefully hidden beneath layers of perfectly applied makeup and practiced smiles. As evening approached and Lisa finally departed with promises to check in tomorrow, Emily found herself alone, with thoughts that circled like autumn leaves in coastal wind. Both children's sudden devotion should have warmed her heart. Instead, it left her feeling oddly hollow, as if their love had become a performance rather than genuine emotion. She stood at her kitchen window, watching fog roll in from the Pacific, and tried to shake the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong. The dizzy spells were getting worse, that much was undeniable. But the way David and Lisa hovered, the meaningful glances they exchanged, the careful choreography of their concern, it felt rehearsed. Emily John had survived the death of her husband, raised 2 children alone, and built a career on understanding the stories that lay beneath surface details. Her instincts had never steered her wrong before, and right now every instinct she possessed was screaming that the children she'd raised and loved were hiding something. Something that had everything to do with her increasingly frequent dizzy spells and the medications Lisa was so eager to organize. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, its rhythm as constant as her own heartbeat. But for the first time in 5 years of widowhood, Emily felt truly alone, and increasingly certain that the family she trusted most might be the very thing she needed to fear. Tomorrow, she decided, she would call Dr. Brennan, not because David suggested it, but because her survival might depend on understanding exactly what was happening to her body, and why her own children seemed so invested in managing every aspect of her medical care. The cramped waiting room of Seaside Medical Center buzzed with the quiet anxiety that permeated all medical facilities. Emily sat rigidly in her chair, clutching her purse with white knuckles as she watched the morning fog dissipate beyond rain-streaked windows. 3 days had passed since that unsettling visit from both children, and the dizzy spells had only intensified. This morning's episode had left her gripping the bathroom counter for nearly 10 minutes, fighting waves of nausea that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep in her chest. Dr. Sarah Brennan's voice carried its familiar warmth as she called Emily's name, but her keen eyes immediately cataloged the subtle changes in her patient's appearance. Emily moved more carefully than usual, her normally steady gait betraying an underlying uncertainty. In 15 years of practice, Sarah had learned to read the stories written in posture, in the way patients held themselves when fear lived beneath their skin. "How are we feeling today, Emily?" Sarah guided her patient toward the examination room, noting the slight tremor in Emily's hands as she settled onto the examination table. "Honestly? Terrible." Emily's admission came with the bluntness of someone who'd spent decades dealing in facts rather than pleasantries. "These dizzy spells are getting worse, and I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind." Sarah's fingers moved with practiced precision as she checked Emily's pulse, immediately noticing the irregular rhythm that hadn't been present during their last visit 6 months ago. The heartbeat felt erratic, almost anxious, with occasional skipped beats that sent small alarms through Sarah's professional consciousness. "Tell me about these episodes. When do they happen? How long do they last?" "Mostly in the mornings, sometimes after meals." Emily's voice carried the methodical tone of someone accustomed to organizing information. "They start with this strange fluttering in my chest. Then everything goes sideways. Yesterday, I nearly fell in my garden." Sarah's stethoscope revealed what her fingers had already detected, an arrhythmia that didn't match Emily's historical baseline. In all their years together, Emily John had been one of her most stable patients. Mild hypertension controlled with medication, excellent cholesterol levels for her age, and the kind of mental acuity that made their appointments feel more like conversations with a colleague than typical doctor-patient interactions. "Have you changed anything recently? Diet, exercise routine, medications?" "Nothing significant." Emily paused, a shadow crossing her features. "Though David and Lisa have been unusually helpful lately, bringing meals, organizing my pills, I suppose I should be grateful." Something in Emily's tone, a hesitation that spoke of unvoiced concerns, made Sarah look up from her chart. In her years of practice, she'd learned that what patients didn't say often mattered more than what they did. "Unusually helpful how?" "They've both been visiting more frequently. David brought homemade soup yesterday, insisted I eat every drop. Lisa reorganized all my medications, set up one of those weekly pill dispensers." Emily's laugh held no humor. "I've been managing my own medications for 72 years, but suddenly they think I need supervision." Sarah's pen paused over Emily's chart. Something about this narrative felt familiar, uncomfortably so. Her grandmother's face flickered through her memory, Dorothy Brennan, sharp as a tack at 85 until her nephew began helping with her finances and medications. The family had dismissed Sarah's concerns as professional paranoia until it was too late. "Emily, I'd like to run some blood work. Check your electrolytes, kidney function, maybe look at your medication levels. Is something wrong? Probably nothing." Sarah's voice carried the careful neutrality she'd perfected over years of delivering uncertain news. "But these symptoms don't quite fit your usual pattern. I want to rule out a few things." The blood draw revealed Emily's veins were more fragile than Sarah remembered, the skin papery beneath her fingers. As the crimson liquid filled the vials, Sarah found herself cataloging other subtle changes. The slight yellow tinge to Emily's sclera, the way her patient's hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. Emily's phone buzzed insistently during the examination. The caller ID showed David's name, and Sarah watched as her patient's face tightened with what looked like resignation rather than pleasure. "I should take this," Emily murmured. "He's been calling constantly since I mentioned the doctor's appointment." Sarah stepped out to give her patient privacy, but Emily's half of the conversation filtered through the thin walls with uncomfortable clarity. "Yes, David, I'm still here. No, I don't need you to come get me. The doctor just wants to run some tests." "I don't know what kind of tests. They're just being thorough." When Sarah returned, Emily's face had taken on the pinched quality of someone fighting a headache. "Everything all right?" "David worries." The words came out flat. "Tired. He's insisting on driving me to any future appointments. Says I shouldn't be behind the wheel with these dizzy spells." Sarah's internal alarms grew louder. Controlling access to medical care was a classic pattern in elder abuse cases, something she'd studied extensively after her grandmother's death. But David John had always seemed devoted to his mother. Charming, perhaps overly solicitous, but hardly the profile of an abuser. "How do you feel about that?" Emily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers worrying the strap of her purse. "I feel like I'm being managed rather than cared for. Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense to Sarah, whose professional training had taught her to trust these subtle intuitions. The way Emily's shoulders curved inward when she mentioned her children, the careful selection of words that avoided direct criticism, the underlying exhaustion that went beyond physical symptoms, it all painted a picture that made Sarah's chest tight with familiar dread. "Emily, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you feel safe at home?" The question hung in the air between them like morning fog, heavy and obscuring. Emily's eyes widened, then quickly shuddered, as if she'd been caught thinking something she shouldn't. "Of course I feel safe. Why would you ask that?" But her voice carried the thread of uncertainty that told Sarah everything she needed to know. Emily John, retired head librarian and one of the sharpest minds Sarah had ever encountered, was beginning to question her own perceptions. And that, more than any medical symptom, sent ice through Sarah's veins. Sometimes when we're not feeling well, we can become more vulnerable to outside influences. "I just want to make sure you have support systems in place. I have Ellen next door. We look out for each other." Emily's mention of her neighbor carried more confidence than anything she'd said about her children. Sarah made a note to follow up on that detail. Neighbors often saw patterns that family members either missed or chose to ignore. "I'm going to put a rush on these blood tests," Sarah said, returning to her professional demeanor. "We should have results by tomorrow. In the meantime, I want you to keep a symptom diary. Note when the dizzy spells happen, what you've eaten, any medications you've taken. Can you do that for me?" "Of course." Emily's librarian instincts sparked at the mention of detailed record-keeping. "Should I mention this to David and Lisa?" "Let's wait until we have the test results," Sarah suggested carefully. "No need to worry them unnecessarily." As Emily gathered her belongings to leave, Sarah found herself studying her patient's face with new intensity. The slight pallor, the way Emily moved as if her body belonged to someone else, the tremor in her hands that seemed to worsen when she was tired. It all added up to a picture that made Sarah's professional instincts scream warnings. "Emily?" Sarah's voice stopped her patient at the door. "If you ever need to talk about anything, you can call me directly. Day or night, do you understand?" Their eyes met across the small examination room, and Sarah saw the flicker of recognition there, the acknowledgement that they were both thinking about possibilities neither wanted to voice aloud. "I understand." After Emily left, Sarah sat alone in the examination room, staring at the blood samples that would hopefully provide answers to questions she prayed she was wrong about asking. Her grandmother's face haunted the edges of her vision, along with the memory of her own helplessness in the face of family dynamics that had prioritized peace over protection. This time would be different. This time, Sarah would trust her instincts before it was too late. She reached for her phone to call the lab, requesting an expedited analysis that would include a comprehensive toxicology screen. Some hunches were too important to ignore, especially when they pointed toward the unthinkable. Emily's hands still trembled slightly as she turned her key in the front door, the sound echoing through the coastal silence that had once brought her such comfort. The drive home from Dr. Brennan's office had been harrowing. Twice she'd felt the world tilt sideways, forcing her to pull over and grip the steering wheel until the sensation passed. David's insistence on driving her to future appointments was beginning to seem less like overprotection and more like necessity, a thought that filled her with equal parts gratitude and unease. The scent of her own home, lavender sachets, and the lingering ghost of Harold's pipe tobacco should have welcomed her like an embrace. Instead, it felt somehow foreign, as if she were a visitor in her own life. The sensation intensified when she discovered both David and Lisa waiting in her living room, their faces wearing matching expressions of carefully calibrated concern. "There you are," Lisa said, rising from Harold's old armchair with the fluid grace that had always made Emily proud. "We were worried when you didn't answer your phone." "I was at the doctor's office." Emily set her purse down with deliberate care, buying herself time to process their presence. "How did you both get in?" "I still have my key from when Dad was sick," David explained, his tone suggesting this should be obvious. "Lisa called me when she couldn't reach you. We thought something might have happened." The explanation was reasonable, logical even. Yet something about finding them in her private space, discussing her whereabouts like concerned parents rather than adult children, made Emily's skin crawl. She'd given them keys for emergencies during Harold's final illness, but that had been 5 years ago. The idea that they'd been using them regularly without her knowledge sent an uncomfortable chill down her spine. "What did Dr. Brennan say?" Lisa's question came with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to casual concern. "She wants to run some tests." Emily moved toward the kitchen, needing the familiar ritual of making tea to ground herself. Both children followed, their footsteps creating an odd echo in the house that had been her sanctuary for over 30 years. "What kind of tests?" David's voice carried an edge that made Emily glance at him sharply. "Blood work. Routine things." She filled the kettle with water, acutely aware of their eyes tracking her every movement. "She thinks the dizzy spells might be related to my medication levels." The silence that followed her words felt heavy, charged with something Emily couldn't quite identify. When she turned around, she caught David and Lisa exchanging one of those loaded glances again. Quick, almost furtive, like conspirators confirming a shared secret. "That's good," Lisa said finally. "Better to be safe. Did you mention that I've been helping organize your medications?" The question came from David with a casualness that didn't match the tension in his shoulders. "Should I have?" Emily's response was sharper than she'd intended. "Is there something about my medication management I should be concerned about?" "Of course not." David's laugh sounded forced. "I just meant, if there's been any confusion about dosing, it might help Dr. Brennan to know someone's been double-checking things." Emily busied herself with tea preparation, using the familiar motions to mask her growing unease. When had her children become so invested in her medical care? When had their concern begun to feel more like surveillance than support? "I've been managing my own medications since before you were born," she said quietly. "I think I can handle a few pills." "Mom, we're just trying to help." Lisa's voice carried a note of hurt that might have been genuine. "After Dad died, we promised ourselves we'd never let you struggle alone." The words should have warmed Emily's heart. Instead, they made her think of Dr. Brennan's final question. "Do you feel safe at home?" At the time, it had seemed absurd. Now, standing in her own kitchen, while her children watched her with an intensity that felt almost predatory, Emily wasn't sure how to answer that question anymore. The kettle's whistle provided a welcome interruption, giving Emily an excuse to turn away from their scrutiny. As she poured the steaming water over her tea bag, she caught her reflection in the kitchen window. Pale, uncertain, older than her 72 years. Behind her reflection, she could see David and Lisa still exchanging those meaningful looks, their body language speaking a language she didn't understand. "I should check on Ellen," Emily announced suddenly. "She mentioned feeling under the weather yesterday." "I'll come with you," David offered immediately. "That's not necessary. It's just next door." "I don't think you should be walking around alone with these dizzy spells," Lisa chimed in. "What if you fall?" The chorus of concern would have been touching if it hadn't felt so much like a cage closing around her. Emily set down her teacup with more force than necessary, the porcelain ringing against the saucer like a small bell of rebellion. "I am 72, not 7. I can walk 50 feet to my neighbor's house without a chaperone." The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. David's face cycled through expressions: surprise, hurt, and something else that looked almost like calculation. Lisa's perfectly composed features didn't change, but Emily caught a flicker of something in her daughter's eyes. Fear, perhaps. Or guilt. "Of course you can," Lisa said smoothly. "We just worry." Emily left them in her kitchen and walked across the small patch of lawn that separated her property from Ellen Martinez's cottage. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing patches of blue sky that promised a clearer afternoon. With each step away from her house, Emily felt as if she could breathe more freely. Ellen answered her door wearing a paint-splattered apron and the kind of genuine smile that had become increasingly rare in Emily's life. "Emily!" "Perfect timing. I just put on coffee." Ellen's sharp brown eyes immediately assessed her friend's appearance. "You look like hell, honey. What's wrong?" The blunt assessment was exactly what Emily needed. Ellen Martinez had taught high school English for 35 years, and her ability to cut through pretense was legendary. In the 5 years since Harold's death, Ellen had become Emily's closest confidant, the sister she'd never had. "I think I'm losing my mind," Emily admitted as Ellen guided her toward the cozy kitchen that smelled of turpentine and fresh coffee. Specific reason, or just general existential dread? Despite everything, Emily smiled. Ellen's dark humor had sustained them both through widowhood, retirement, and the general indignities of aging in a youth-obsessed culture. David and Lisa have been different lately, more attentive, almost obsessively so. Ellen poured coffee into mismatched mugs, her movements economical and purposeful. Define different. Constant visits, bringing food, organizing my medications, calling multiple times a day. Emily wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for its solid reality. "And they keep exchanging these looks, like they're sharing some secret I'm not supposed to know about." Ellen settled into the chair across from her, gray eyebrows drawing together in concentration. "How long has this been going on?" "Maybe 6 weeks?" "It started gradually, then intensified." Emily paused, considering. "Right around the time I mentioned updating my will." Ellen's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "Updating how?" "Nothing dramatic, just some charitable bequests I'd been considering. Harold always wanted to endow a scholarship at the library." Emily felt heat creep up her neck. "I mentioned it during Sunday dinner, and suddenly David was very interested in the details. How much I was planning to give, whether it would affect their inheritance." "And what did you tell him?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The truth. That there would be plenty left for both of them, but I wanted to do something meaningful with Harold's life insurance money. Ellen set down her coffee with deliberate care. "Emily, honey, I need to tell you something. I've been watching David and Lisa's visits, and they don't feel right to me either." The validation hit Emily like a physical relief. "What do you mean?" "They show up at odd times, often when you're not expecting them. They stay longer than social visits usually last." And Ellen hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I've seen David looking through your windows when he thinks no one's watching. Emily's stomach dropped. Looking through my windows? Last Tuesday, when you went to the grocery store. I was watering my plants and saw him walk around your house, checking all the ground floor windows. When he saw me watching, he waved and said he was checking your security. But Emily, it didn't look like a security check. It looked like surveillance. The coffee turned bitter in Emily's mouth. Every instinct she'd developed over decades of reading people and situations was screaming warnings she'd been trying to ignore. Her own children, the babies she'd nursed, the toddlers she'd comforted, the teenagers she'd guided through heartbreak and triumph, were watching her like predators studying prey. There's something else, Ellen continued, her voice gentle but insistent. I've been tracking their visits, just out of curiosity. They're coordinated. When one leaves, the other arrives within hours, like they're taking shifts. Shifts monitoring what? That's what we need to figure out. Ellen reached across the table and covered Emily's hand with her own. But I think you should trust your instincts on this one. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Through Ellen's kitchen window, Emily could see her own house, where David and Lisa were presumably still waiting for her return. The building that had sheltered her family for 3 decades now looked different, less like a home and more like a trap. Dr. Brennan asked me if I felt safe, Emily said quietly. And what did you tell her? I said yes, but I'm not sure that's true anymore. Ellen squeezed her hand. Then we need to figure out why. And we need to do it before whatever they're planning goes any further. The fog had completely lifted now, revealing the Pacific Ocean in all its vast indifference. Emily stared at the horizon and tried to imagine what secrets her children might be keeping. What plan might require such careful coordination and surveillance? The possibilities that occurred to her were too terrible to voice, but they circled her mind like vultures, waiting for her to acknowledge what her heart already knew. Something was very, very wrong, and for the first time in her adult life, Emily John wasn't sure she could trust the people she loved most to keep her safe. Dr. Sarah Brennan's hands were steady as she reviewed Emily John's blood work results on her computer screen. But her heart hammered against her ribs with the familiar dread that accompanied her worst suspicions being confirmed. The numbers glowed back at her in stark digital clarity, digitalis levels of 3, 2 nanograms per milliliter, well above the therapeutic range for someone not prescribed the medication, and dangerously close to toxic levels. She'd requested the toxicology screen on a hunch, praying she was wrong. The elevated digitalis levels proved she wasn't. Someone was poisoning Emily John. Sarah's office suddenly felt too small, the familiar medical texts and diplomas on her walls seeming to close in around her. She'd seen elder abuse cases before. The suspicious bruising explained away as clumsiness, the sudden changes in wills, the family members who insisted on controlling every aspect of an elderly relative's care. But this was different. This was methodical, calculated, and utterly ruthless. Digitalis poisoning was particularly insidious. In small doses, it mimicked the natural progression of aging: dizziness, fatigue, confusion. Symptoms that could be easily dismissed by both patient and family as the inevitable decline of advancing years. But in the doses showing up in Emily's bloodstream, it was a death sentence delivered in careful increments. Sarah reached for her phone, then hesitated. Standard protocol required her to contact the authorities immediately, but something about Emily's situation demanded a more delicate approach. If her suspicions were correct, Emily was living with her would-be killers, trusting them to care for her while they slowly murdered her. One wrong move could escalate the situation beyond repair. Instead, she dialed the direct line for Detective Ray Kowalski at Oregon State Police. They'd worked together on elder abuse cases before, and his methodical approach to sensitive investigations had earned her respect and trust. Kowalski. Ray, it's Dr. Brennan at Seaside Medical. I need to report a suspected poisoning case, but it's complicated. The pause on the other end told her Ray was already shifting into professional mode. How complicated? Elderly patient, 72 years old, presenting with symptoms consistent with digitalis toxicity. She's not prescribed digitalis, but her blood levels are 3. 2. Family members? 2 adult children who've recently become very involved in her care, bringing meals, organizing medications, controlling access to medical appointments. Classic pattern. Ray's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd seen this scenario too many times. What's your relationship with the patient? I've been her physician for 15 years. She's sharp, independent, no history of confusion or self-medication issues. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. Ray, this woman was head librarian at Seaside Public for 40 years. She's not someone who makes mistakes with medications. Understood. I'll need to interview her, but we'll have to be careful. If the family suspects we're onto them. They could accelerate their timeline, Sarah finished. The possibility sent ice through her veins. Ray, I need to call her in for follow-up tests. Can you coordinate with me on timing? Absolutely. And Dr. Brennan? Document everything. Every symptom, every conversation, every inconsistency. We're going to need a paper trail that's bulletproof. After ending the call, Sarah sat in the heavy silence of her office, staring at Emily's test results. The numbers didn't lie, but they also didn't tell the whole story. Somewhere in Seaside, a 72-year-old woman was being slowly murdered by people she trusted, and Sarah was one of the few people who knew it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Feeling worse today. Should I be concerned about the test results? Sarah's throat tightened. Emily's intuitive question suggested she was beginning to sense something was seriously wrong. The challenge was confirming Sarah's suspicions without putting Emily in greater danger. She typed back carefully. I'd like to see you again tomorrow. Can you come in around 2 p.m.? And Emily, this is important. Don't mention this appointment to anyone until after we've talked. The response came quickly. Is something wrong? We'll discuss everything tomorrow. Just between us for now. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon researching digitalis poisoning cases, her medical training warring with her emotional response to Emily's situation. The drug was derived from foxglove plants, readily available to anyone with basic gardening knowledge. In therapeutic doses, it strengthened heart contractions and regulated rhythm. In the doses Emily was receiving, it would eventually cause cardiac arrest that would look entirely natural in a woman her age. The brilliance of the murder method was almost admirable in its cruelty. Digitalis toxicity mimicked so many conditions common in elderly patients that most physicians wouldn't think to test for it unless specifically suspicious. The killer was counting on Emily's symptoms being attributed to natural aging or underlying health conditions. But they hadn't counted on Emily having a physician who'd lost her own grandmother to family-perpetrated abuse. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her grim research. The caller ID showed Emily's number. Dr. Brennan? I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm feeling quite unwell. Emily's voice sounded weak, strained in a way that sent alarm bells through Sarah's consciousness. What kind of symptoms? Nausea, dizziness worse than usual, and my heart feels strange, like it's skipping beats. Classic signs of increasing digitalis toxicity. Someone had given Emily another dose recently. Emily, have you eaten anything unusual today? Taken any medications you don't normally take? David brought lunch, one of those health smoothies he's been making. Said it would help with my energy levels. Emily's voice carried a note of uncertainty. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I drank it all. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. The smoothie was likely the delivery method, the bitter taste of digitalis easily masked by fruit and yogurt. Emily, I need you to listen carefully. Are David or Lisa with you right now? No. They both left about an hour ago. Why? I want you to drink plenty of water and avoid any food or beverages that anyone else has prepared. Can you do that for me? Dr. Brennan, you're scaring me. Sarah closed her eyes, weighing her options. Emily deserved to know she was in danger, but revealing too much over the phone could put her at even greater risk. We'll talk more tomorrow, but Emily, if you start feeling worse, chest pain, severe nausea, trouble breathing, I want you to call 911 immediately. Don't call David or Lisa first. Do you understand? I understand. After hanging up, Sarah immediately called Ray Kowalski back. We may need to move faster than planned. I think they just gave her another dose. How do you know? She called with worsening symptoms after drinking a smoothie her son prepared. Ray, if they're escalating the dosing, she could be dead by the weekend. His voice carried the grim professionalism of someone who'd calculated similar timelines before. I'll start surveillance tonight. And Dr. Brennan? If she calls with severe symptoms, get her to the hospital immediately. Don't worry about blowing our investigation. Better a live witness than a dead victim. Sarah spent the evening researching emergency protocols for digitalis poisoning while wrestling with the ethical complexities of her situation. Medical training demanded she prioritize patient safety above all else, but premature action could drive Emily's killers underground, potentially to strike again with future victims. Her phone buzzed with another text from Emily. Found something disturbing. Can we talk privately before my appointment tomorrow? Sarah's pulse accelerated. What did you find? Evidence that makes me think you were right to ask if I felt safe. The response confirmed Sarah's worst fears, while simultaneously filling her with admiration for Emily's courage. Even while being poisoned, the retired librarian was conducting her own investigation. Call me if you need immediate help. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow at 2. Emily. Trust no one but me and Detective Kowalski until we sort this out. Detective Kowalski? I'll explain everything tomorrow. Stay safe. Sarah stared at her phone long after the conversation ended, knowing that tomorrow's appointment would change everything. Emily John had figured out she was being poisoned, which meant the deadly charade was about to end one way or another. The question was whether they could gather enough evidence to convict Emily's would-be killers before those killers realized their victim was no longer the trusting, vulnerable target they'd assumed her to be. In her coastal Oregon home, Emily John was transforming from victim to survivor, and Dr. Sarah Brennan intended to make sure she lived long enough to see justice done. The game of cat and mouse was about to begin in earnest, with Emily's life hanging in the balance and time running out faster than any of them had anticipated. Emily John had always prided herself on her ability to remain calm under pressure. 40 years of managing library crises, from funding cuts to irate patrons demanding banned books, had taught her the value of methodical thinking when chaos threatened. But as she sat at her kitchen table at 6 a.m., staring at the pill organizer Lisa had so helpfully arranged, Emily felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. The tiny plastic compartments mocked her with their neat organization. Monday through Sunday, morning and evening doses, each section filled with the medications that were supposed to keep her healthy. Except now, thanks to Dr. Brennan's carefully worded warnings and her own growing suspicions, Emily suspected at least some of those pills were designed to kill her. Her hands trembled as she dumped the contents of the Monday morning compartment into her palm. Blood pressure medication, calcium supplement, multivitamin, all familiar shapes and colors she'd been taking for years. But there, nestled among the legitimate pills, was something new. A small white tablet she didn't recognize, unmarked, and slightly different in texture from the others. Emily's librarian training kicked in automatically. She photographed the mysterious pill with her phone, then carefully separated it from the others before returning the remaining medications to their compartment. The unknown tablet went into a small envelope, which she labeled with the date and time, evidence that might prove crucial later. The irony wasn't lost on her. After decades of helping others research answers to their questions, Emily was now conducting the most important investigation of her life, determining whether her own children were trying to murder her. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Morning, Mom. Made extra smoothies yesterday. Left one in your fridge. Perfect breakfast for someone with your energy issues. Red heart." Emily stared at the message, noting the heart emoji that now seemed less like affection and more like mockery. The smoothie sat in her refrigerator, like a beautiful trap, its innocent green color hiding whatever poison David had blended with the spinach and fruit. She typed back, "Thanks, honey, I'll have it later. Still feeling a bit queasy this morning." The response came immediately, "You need to keep your strength up. Maybe just a few sips?" The insistence in his message made Emily's skin crawl. She could almost hear the desperation beneath his casual concern. the urgency of someone whose timeline was being disrupted. Instead of responding, Emily dumped the smoothie down the kitchen sink, watching the thick liquid disappear into the drain like the trust she'd once had in her children. Then she opened a can of soup for breakfast, something David and Lisa hadn't touched, and ate it directly from the pot while standing at her stove. The simple act of preparing and consuming her own food felt revolutionary. For weeks, she'd been grateful for their attention, touched by their sudden devotion to her nutrition and well-being. Now she understood that every meal they'd prepared, every snack they'd insisted she consume, had been another step toward her grave. Her doorbell rang at exactly 8 a.m. Through the window, Emily could see Lisa's silver Lexus in the driveway, her daughter's blonde head visible through the windshield as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Always maintaining appearances, even for a murder. Emily opened the door wearing her most convincing smile. "Lisa, you're early today. I wanted to catch you before you started your day." Lisa stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning the kitchen. "Did you have the smoothie David left?" "Not yet. I was just about to." Lisa's relief was palpable. "Good. He was worried you might not eat it. You know how he gets when he thinks you're not taking care of yourself." The casual mention of David's concern sent chills down Emily's spine. They were coordinating, communicating about her consumption of the poisoned food like farmers discussing livestock feed. "I should probably have some breakfast first," Emily said carefully. "Smoothies on an empty stomach sometimes make me nauseous." "Oh, but Mom, David specifically made this one to settle your stomach. It has ginger and mint." Lisa moved toward the refrigerator with purpose. "Really, you should drink it now. For your health." Emily watched her daughter's face, noting the tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way Lisa's manicured fingers drummed against her purse strap. The real estate agent's mask was slipping, revealing the desperation beneath. "I already threw it away," Emily lied smoothly. It had turned brown overnight. "You know how those green smoothies get." Lisa's face went pale. "You threw it away? Is that a problem?" "No, of course not. It's just—" Lisa struggled visibly. "David spent a lot of time making that. He'll be disappointed." "I'm sure he'll understand." Emily moved to the coffee maker, buying herself time to think. "Would you like some coffee?" "Actually, I brought tea." Lisa produced a thermos from her oversized purse. "That herbal blend you like, I made extra." Another offering. Another chance for Emily to consume whatever they were using to poison her. The pattern was becoming clear. They were taking shifts, each arrival accompanied by food or drink designed to deliver another dose of whatever was slowly killing her. "That's sweet of you, but I just made coffee." "Mom, you've been drinking too much caffeine lately. It's probably contributing to your heart palpitations." Lisa's voice carried an edge of frustration. "This tea will help calm your system." Emily studied her daughter's face, seeing the truth written in the tension around her eyes. Lisa knew about the heart palpitations because Lisa was causing them. The knowledge sat in Emily's stomach like a stone, heavy and indigestible. "You're probably right," Emily said, accepting the thermos. "I'll have some later." She set the container on the counter, noting how Lisa's eyes tracked its movement. Another test failed. Another opportunity for poisoning postponed. Lisa's phone buzzed and she glanced at it with obvious anxiety. "I should probably get going. Early showing today." "Of course. Thank you for thinking of me." After Lisa left, Emily sat in her living room and tried to process the magnitude of what she was facing. Her children, the babies she'd nursed through midnight fevers, the toddlers she'd comforted after nightmares, the teenagers she'd supported through heartbreak and triumph, were systematically poisoning her for money. The financial motive made terrible sense. David's construction business had been failing for years, his divorce settlement had left him nearly bankrupt, and his pride would never allow him to ask for help directly. Lisa's real estate career looked successful from the outside, but Emily had noticed the designer clothes that looked increasingly worn, the way her daughter's smile became strained when money was mentioned. How much was Emily's life worth to them? The house was paid off, worth at least $800,000 in the current coastal market. Harold's life insurance had left her with substantial savings. The modest inheritance they'd been expecting had probably grown into a fortune worthy of murder in their desperate minds. Her phone rang, interrupting her dark calculations. Dr. Brennan's number appeared on the screen. "Emily, how are you feeling today?" "Like someone's been trying to poison me," Emily said with dark humor. "I'm glad you can still joke about it. Are you somewhere private?" "Yes. And Dr. Brennan?" "I found something." Emily described the unknown pill in her medication organizer, the smoothie she'd disposed of, Lisa's suspicious insistence on the herbal tea. "Emily, I need you to listen carefully. What you found is evidence of attempted murder. I've been in contact with Detective Ray Kowalski from the state police. He's going to want to interview you, but we need to do this carefully." "They're going to realize I know, aren't they?" "Probably. Which is why we need to move fast." Dr. Brennan's voice carried the calm authority that had always comforted Emily. "Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say, 2 p.m.? And Emily, don't eat or drink anything that David or Lisa have prepared. Not until we resolve this." "What if they insist?" "Then you'll have to get creative. Spill it, claim you're not hungry, hide it in the garbage disposal. Whatever it takes to stay alive until we can arrest them." After the call ended, Emily found herself staring at the thermos Lisa had brought. The herbal tea that was supposed to calm her system and probably contained enough poison to stop her heart permanently. She opened the container and sniffed the contents, detecting the familiar scent of chamomile mixed with something else, something bitter that made her recoil instinctively. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. "How was the smoothie? Feeling better?" Emily stared at the message, understanding that her response would determine how the rest of this day unfolded. If she lied and claimed to have consumed the poisoned drinks, they might back off temporarily. If she told the truth, they might escalate their efforts. She chose a middle path. Couldn't finish it. Stomach still upset. Maybe later. The response was immediate. "Coming over. You need to eat something." Emily's blood chilled. David was on his way, probably with more poisoned food, and this time he might not accept her excuses. She had 3 hours until her appointment with Dr. Brennan, 3 hours to survive whatever her son might try. She quickly gathered the evidence she'd collected, the mysterious pill, photos of her medication organizer, the thermos of poisoned tea, and hid them in Harold's old briefcase. If something happened to her, at least there would be a trail for investigators to follow. The sound of David's truck in her driveway arrived sooner than expected. Emily positioned herself in the kitchen, trying to look sick enough to justify not eating whatever he'd brought, but not so sick that he'd insist on taking her to the hospital. David entered carrying a bag from the local deli, his smile warm and concerned. "Mom, you look terrible. Have you been taking your medications?" "Yes, of course." "All of them? Even the new ones Lisa organized?" Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. "The new ones?" "The additional supplements Dr. Brennan recommended. Lisa said she added them to your pill organizer last week." Another lie, smoothly delivered. There were no new supplements from Dr. Brennan, which meant the mysterious white pills were pure poison disguised as medical treatment. "I've been taking everything in the organizer," Emily said carefully. "Good. You need to keep your strength up." David unpacked the deli bag, revealing a container of soup and a sandwich. "I got your favorite tomato basil soup from Murphy's." Emily accepted the container, noting how David watched her every movement. "This is sweet of you, honey. Make sure you eat all of it. You're getting too thin." The insistence in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a loving son bringing comfort food to his ailing mother. This was a killer, ensuring his victim consumed the poison. Emily lifted the spoon to her lips, pretending to take a sip while actually letting the liquid touch only her tongue. The familiar taste of tomato and basil was there, but underneath lurked something else, a bitter, medicinal flavor that made her want to gag. "It's delicious," she lied, setting down the spoon, "but I think I need to pace myself. My stomach's been so sensitive lately. David's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Just a few more spoonfuls, Mom. For me. Emily realized with crystal clarity that she was looking at a stranger wearing her son's face. The man who'd once cried when she'd been late picking him up from school, who'd brought her dandelions and construction paper cards every Mother's Day, was now calmly insisting she consume poison that would kill her within hours. I will, she promised, but let me rest for a minute first. David's phone buzzed and he glanced at it with obvious irritation. Lisa's having issues with a client. I need to help her out. Of course, go ahead. Finish the soup while I'm gone. Promise me. I promise. The lie came easily now, self-preservation overriding a lifetime of honesty. As David left, Emily dumped the poisoned soup down the garbage disposal, listening to the motor grind away the evidence of her children's betrayal. 2 hours until Dr. Brennan. 2 hours to survive whatever came next. Emily John, retired librarian and survivor, settled in to wait for rescue while praying her children's patience would last longer than their desperation. Emily John had always prided herself on her ability to remain calm under pressure. 40 years of managing library crises, from funding cuts to irate patrons demanding banned books, had taught her the value of methodical thinking when chaos threatened. But as she sat at her kitchen table at 6 a.m., staring at the pill organizer Lisa had so helpfully arranged, Emily felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. The tiny plastic compartments mocked her with their neat organization. Monday through Sunday, morning and evening doses, each section filled with the medications that were supposed to keep her healthy. Except now, thanks to Dr. Brennan's carefully worded warnings and her own growing suspicions, Emily suspected at least some of those pills were designed to kill her. Her hands trembled as she dumped the contents of the Monday morning compartment into her palm. Blood pressure medication, calcium supplement, multivitamin, all familiar shapes and colors she'd been taking for years. But there, nestled among the legitimate pills, was something new. A small white tablet she didn't recognize, unmarked and slightly different in texture from the others. Emily's librarian training kicked in automatically. She photographed the mysterious pill with her phone, then carefully separated it from the others before returning the remaining medications to their compartment. The unknown tablet went into a small envelope, which she labeled with the date and time, evidence that might prove crucial later. The irony wasn't lost on her. After decades of helping others research answers to their questions, Emily was now conducting the most important investigation of her life, determining whether her own children were trying to murder her. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Morning, Mom. Made extra smoothies yesterday. Left one in your fridge. Perfect breakfast for someone with your energy issues. Emily stared at the message, noting the heart emoji that now seemed less like affection and more like mockery. The smoothie sat in her refrigerator like a beautiful trap, its innocent green color hiding whatever poison David had blended with the spinach and fruit. She typed back, "Thanks, honey. I'll have it later. Still feeling a bit queasy this morning." The response came immediately. "You need to keep your strength up. Maybe just a few sips?" The insistence in his message made Emily's skin crawl. She could almost hear the desperation beneath his casual concern, the urgency of someone whose timeline was being disrupted. Instead of responding, Emily dumped the smoothie down the kitchen sink, watching the thick liquid disappear into the drain like the trust she'd once had in her children. Then she opened a can of soup for breakfast, something David and Lisa hadn't touched, and ate it directly from the pot while standing at her stove. The simple act of preparing and consuming her own food felt revolutionary. For weeks, she'd been grateful for their attention, touched by their sudden devotion to her nutrition and well-being. Now she understood that every meal they'd prepared, every snack they'd insisted she consume, had been another step toward her grave. Her doorbell rang at exactly 8 a.m. Through the window, Emily could see Lisa's silver Lexus in the driveway, her daughter's blonde head visible through the windshield as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Always maintaining appearances, even for a murder. Emily opened the door wearing her most convincing smile. "Lisa! You're early today. I wanted to catch you before you started your day." Lisa stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning the kitchen. "Did you have the smoothie David left?" "Not yet. I was just about to." Lisa's relief was palpable. "Good. He was worried you might not eat it. You know how he gets when he thinks you're not taking care of yourself." The casual mention of David's concern sent chills down Emily's spine. They were communicating about her consumption of the poisoned food like farmers discussing livestock feed. "I should probably have some breakfast first," Emily said carefully. "Smoothies on an empty stomach sometimes make me nauseous." "Oh, but Mom, David specifically made this one to settle your stomach. It has ginger and mint." Lisa moved toward the refrigerator with purpose. "Really, you should drink it now. For your health." Emily watched her daughter's face, noting the tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way Lisa's manicured fingers drummed against her purse strap. The real estate agent's mask was slipping, revealing the desperation beneath. "I already threw it away," Emily lied smoothly. "It had turned brown overnight. You know how those green smoothies get." Lisa's face went pale. "You threw it away? Is that a problem?" "No, of course not. It's just—" Lisa struggled visibly. "David spent a lot of time making that. He'll be disappointed. I'm sure he'll understand." Emily moved to the coffee maker, buying herself time to think. "Would you like some coffee? Actually, I brought tea." Lisa produced a thermos from her oversized purse. "That herbal blend you like, I made extra." Another offering. Another chance for Emily to consume whatever they were using to poison her. The pattern was becoming clear. They were taking shifts, each arrival accompanied by food or drink, designed to deliver another dose of whatever was slowly killing her. "That's sweet of you, but I just made coffee." "Mom, you've been drinking too much caffeine lately. It's probably contributing to your heart palpitations." Lisa's voice carried an edge of frustration. "This tea will help calm your system." Emily studied her daughter's face, seeing the truth written in the tension around her eyes. Lisa knew about the heart palpitations because Lisa was causing them. The knowledge sat in Emily's stomach like a stone, heavy and indigestible. "You're probably right," Emily said, accepting the thermos. "I'll have some later." She set the container on the counter, noting how Lisa's eyes tracked its movement. Another test failed. Another opportunity for poisoning postponed. Lisa's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with obvious anxiety. "I should probably get going. Early showing today." "Of course. Thank you for thinking of me." After Lisa left, Emily sat in her living room and tried to process the magnitude of what she was facing. Her children, the babies she'd nursed through midnight fevers, the toddlers she'd comforted after nightmares, the teenagers she'd supported through heartbreak and triumph, were systematically poisoning her for money. The financial motive made terrible sense. David's construction business had been failing for years, his divorce settlement had left him nearly bankrupt, and his pride would never allow him to ask for help directly. Lisa's real estate career looked successful from the outside, but Emily had noticed the designer clothes that looked increasingly worn, the way her daughter's smile became strained when money was mentioned. How much was Emily's life worth to them? The house was paid off, worth at least $800,000 in the current coastal market. Harold's life insurance had left her with substantial savings. The modest inheritance they'd been expecting had probably grown into a fortune worthy of murder in their desperate minds. Her phone rang, interrupting her dark calculations. Dr. Brennan's number appeared on the screen. "Emily, how are you feeling today?" "Like someone's been trying to poison me," Emily said with dark humor. "I'm glad you can still joke about it. Are you somewhere private?" "Yes. And Dr. Brennan?" "I found something." Emily described the unknown pill in her medication organizer, the smoothie she'd disposed of, Lisa's suspicious insistence on the herbal tea. "Emily, I need you to listen carefully. What you've found is evidence of attempted murder. I've been in contact with Detective Ray Kowalski from the state police. He's going to want to interview you, but we need to do this carefully." "They're going to realize I know, aren't they?" "Probably. which is why we need to move fast. Dr. Brennan's voice carried the calm authority that had always comforted Emily. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say 2 p.m.? And Emily, don't eat or drink anything that David or Lisa have prepared. Not until we resolve this. What if they insist? Then you'll have to get creative. Spill it. Claim you're not hungry. Hide it in the garbage disposal. Whatever it takes to stay alive until we can arrest them. After the call ended, Emily found herself staring at the thermos Lisa had brought. The herbal tea that was supposed to calm her system, and probably contained enough poison to stop her heart permanently. She opened the container and sniffed the contents, detecting the familiar scent of chamomile mixed with something else, something bitter that made her recoil instinctively. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. How was the smoothie? Feeling better? Emily stared at the message, understanding that her response would determine how the rest of this day unfolded. If she lied and claimed to have consumed the poisoned drinks, they might back off temporarily. If she told the truth, they might escalate their efforts. She chose a middle path, couldn't finish it, stomach still upset, maybe later. The response was immediate. Coming over. You need to eat something. Emily's blood chilled. David was on his way, probably with more poisoned food, and this time he might not accept her excuses. She had 3 hours until her appointment with Dr. Brennan, 3 hours to survive whatever her son might try. She quickly gathered the evidence she'd collected, the mysterious pill, photos of her medication organizer, the thermos of poisoned tea, and hid them in Harold's old briefcase. If something happened to her, at least there would be a trail for investigators to follow. The sound of David's truck in her driveway arrived sooner than expected. Emily positioned herself in the kitchen, trying to look sick enough to justify not eating whatever he'd brought, but not so sick that he'd insist on taking her to the hospital. David entered carrying a bag from the local deli, his smile warm and concerned. Mom, you look terrible. Have you been taking your medications? Yes, of course. All of them? Even the new ones Lisa organized? Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. The new ones? The additional supplements Dr. Brennan recommended. Lisa said she added them to your pill organizer last week. Another lie. Smoothly delivered. There were no new supplements from Dr. Brennan, which meant the mysterious white pills were pure poison disguised as medical treatment. I've been taking everything in the organizer, Emily said carefully. Good. You need to keep your strength up. David unpacked the deli bag, revealing a container of soup and a sandwich. I got your favorite tomato basil soup from Murphy's. Emily accepted the container, noting how David watched her every movement. This is sweet of you, honey. Make sure you eat all of it. You're getting too thin. The insistence in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a loving son bringing comfort food to his ailing mother. This was a killer ensuring his victim consumed the poison. Emily lifted the spoon to her lips, pretending to take a sip, while actually letting the liquid touch only her tongue. The familiar taste of tomato and basil was there, but underneath lurked something else, a bitter, medicinal flavor that made her want to gag. It's delicious, she lied, setting down the spoon, but I think I need to pace myself. My stomach's been so sensitive lately. David's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Just a few more spoonfuls, Mom. For me. Emily realized with crystal clarity that she was looking at a stranger wearing her son's face. The man who'd once cried when she'd been late picking him up from school, who'd brought her dandelions and construction paper cards every Mother's Day, was now calmly insisting she consume poison that would kill her within hours. I will, she promised. But let me rest for a minute first. David's phone buzzed and he glanced at it with obvious irritation. Lisa's having issues with a client. I need to help her out. Of course, go ahead. Finish the soup while I'm gone. Promise me. I promise. The lie came easily now, self-preservation overriding a lifetime of honesty. As David left, Emily dumped the poisoned soup down the garbage disposal, listening to the motor grind away the evidence of her children's betrayal. 2 hours until Dr. Brennan. 2 hours to survive whatever came next. Emily John, retired librarian and survivor, settled in to wait for rescue, while praying her children's patience would last longer than their desperation. Lisa John Morrison sat in her car outside her mother's house, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The search had been fruitless. Whatever evidence Emily might have gathered was well hidden, and time was running out faster than Lisa had ever imagined possible. Her phone buzzed with another text from her mortgage company, the third notice in as many days. Past due. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings. The irony was suffocating. In less than a week, she could have been a wealthy woman, inheriting enough money to solve every financial crisis that had been slowly strangling her for the past 2 years. Instead, their mother seemed to be developing an inconvenient resistance to the carefully calibrated doses of digitalis that should have resulted in a peaceful, natural-looking cardiac event weeks ago. Lisa's phone rang, David's name flashing on the screen like an accusation. "Did you find anything?" His voice carried the sharp edge of barely controlled panic. "Nothing. She must have moved whatever she found." Lisa watched Emily's house through her windshield, noting the drawn curtains that hadn't been closed when she'd left earlier. "David, I think she knows. She can't know, there's no way she could figure it out." "Then explain why she didn't drink your smoothie this morning. Or the tea I brought. Or the soup you left this afternoon." Lisa's voice cracked slightly. "She's avoiding everything we give her." The silence on David's end stretched long enough that Lisa wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted into something darker, more calculating. "Then we need to accelerate the timeline." "What does that mean?" "It means we give her a dose large enough that it doesn't matter if she's suspicious. Tomorrow night, family dinner. We'll put enough in her food to stop her heart within hours." Lisa's stomach lurched. The plan had always been gradual poisoning, making their mother's death look like natural decline. What David was suggesting was essentially execution. "David, that's not what we agreed on." "Plans change, Lisa. You want to lose your house? You want Tom to find out about the credit cards, the second mortgage you took out without telling him?" His voice turned cruel. "Because that's what happens if Mom lives long enough to change her will." Lisa closed her eyes, seeing her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. Tom thought they were financially stable, that Lisa's real estate career was thriving. He had no idea she'd been robbing Peter to pay Paul for months, using credit advances to make mortgage payments, selling jewelry, and lying about where the money went. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "You don't have a choice. We're in this together now." After David hung up, Lisa sat in her car and tried to remember when her love for her mother had been overshadowed by desperation for her money. The transformation had been gradual, insidious. First came the resentment about Emily's plans to donate Harold's insurance money that could solve all of Lisa's problems. Then came the research into digitalis, initially just curiosity about how heart medications worked. Finally came the terrible realization that her mother's death would solve everything, and that careful application of foxglove extract could make that death look entirely natural. But somewhere along the way, the theoretical had become reality, and Lisa found herself actively participating in her mother's murder. The guilt had been eating at her for weeks, manifesting as panic attacks, sleepless nights, and a growing distance from Tom that he'd begun to notice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom, "Kids asking when you'll be home. Everything okay?" Lisa stared at the message, thinking about her teenagers who still looked at her like she was a hero, who trusted her to make the right choices for their family. What would they think if they knew their mother was a murderer? She typed back, "On my way home, love you." The drive to her house in the suburbs felt like a journey between two different lives. In one life, she was a successful real estate agent with a loving family and a bright future. In the other, she was a desperate woman who'd sold her soul for money that would buy temporary salvation at the cost of permanent damnation. Tom was in the kitchen when she arrived, preparing dinner, while their 16-year-old daughter Sarah did homework at the counter, and their 14-year-old son Michael played video games in the living room. The picture of domestic normalcy made Lisa want to weep. "How's your mom?" Tom asked, looking up from the stove with genuine concern. "You've been spending a lot of time over there lately." "She's having some health issues." The lie came easier than it should have. David and I are trying to make sure she's taking care of herself. Tom's expression softened. That's good of you. I know how much you love her. The simple statement hit Lisa like a physical blow. She did love her mother, had always loved her. Emily John had raised 2 children alone after Harold's death, working long hours at the library, while somehow managing to attend every school play, every soccer game, every milestone that mattered. She'd sacrificed her own dreams to ensure David and Lisa had opportunities she'd never had. And now Lisa was repaying that love with poison. Mom? Sarah looked up from her algebra homework. Are you crying? Lisa wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a smile. Just tired, sweetheart. Long day. But Tom was studying her with the careful attention of someone who'd been married for 20 years. He knew her tells, her moods, the way stress manifested in her body language. That evening, after the kids were in bed, he cornered her in their bedroom. Lisa, what's really going on? You've been different lately, distracted, anxious. And don't tell me it's just work stress. Lisa sat on their bed, looking at the man she'd married when they were both young and idealistic, when the future had seemed full of possibilities rather than financial pitfalls. Tom represented everything good in her life: honesty, integrity, unconditional love. He would never understand how she'd reached the point where murder seemed like a reasonable solution to their problems. I've been worried about Mom, she said carefully. She's been having dizzy spells, seems confused sometimes. I'm afraid she's declining faster than we realized. Tom sat beside her, taking her hand in his. Is that why you've been so stressed? Honey, aging parents are hard, but you can't carry that burden alone. We're a team, remember? The kindness in his voice was unbearable. Tom would help her find solutions to their financial problems if he knew how bad things had gotten. He'd work extra hours, sell his car, do whatever it took to keep their family afloat. But Lisa had been too proud to admit her failures, too afraid of disappointing him to reveal the depth of their crisis. Tom, if I told you something terrible, something that might change how you feel about me, would you still love me? His answer came without hesitation. Of course. Lisa, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Lisa looked into her husband's eyes and saw the man who'd promised to love her in sickness and health, for better or worse. The man who'd held her hand through 2 difficult pregnancies, who'd supported her career even when it meant less time with their children, who'd never once made her feel like her worth was tied to her earning potential. And in that moment, Lisa John Morrison made a choice that would either save her soul or destroy her family. I need to tell you something about Mom's health problems, and about David, and about what we've been doing. The confession poured out of her like water through a broken dam. The financial pressures, the mounting debts, the desperate research into digitalis poisoning. Tom's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, a kind of sick understanding that made Lisa want to disappear entirely. You've been poisoning your mother? His voice was barely a whisper. Not me directly. David's been handling the preparation. I've just been helping with delivery. The smoothies, the tea, organizing her medications. Lisa's words sounded pathetic even to her own ears. Tom, I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just research, just wondering what would happen if she died naturally. But then David found those foxglove plants in her garden, and he started talking about how easy it would be, how it would solve everything. Jesus Christ, Lisa! Tom stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. Do you understand what you're telling me? You're talking about murdering your mother for money. I know how it sounds. How it sounds. Lisa, this isn't some financial miscalculation or career setback. This is premeditated murder. Of your own mother. Tom's voice carried a tone she'd never heard before. Disgust mixed with something that might have been fear. How could you even consider this? Because I was desperate. Because we're 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the kids need college funds, and I thought if Mom died naturally, it would solve everything. Lisa was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. I never wanted to hurt her. I love her. But I didn't know what else to do. Tom stared at his wife as if seeing a stranger. What else to do? You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. You could have done literally anything, except try to murder your mother. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to know how badly I'd screwed up our finances. So instead you decided to become a killer? Tom's voice was getting louder, and Lisa prayed the children were asleep. Lisa, do you have any idea what this means? For us? For our kids? Tom, please, I'll stop. I'll tell David the first can't do it anymore. We'll find another way. Another way? Tom laughed bitterly. Lisa, you've already committed attempted murder. The only question now is whether your mother is still alive, and whether the police know what you've done. The mention of police sent fresh terror through Lisa's system. She'd been so focused on the financial aspects of their plan that she'd barely considered the legal consequences. Prison. Loss of her children. The complete destruction of everything she'd tried so desperately to preserve. What am I going to do? Tom stood silent for a long moment, and Lisa could see him wrestling with emotions she couldn't even imagine. Finally, he spoke with the careful control of someone making the most difficult decision of his life. You're going to call the police, tonight. You're going to tell them everything, and you're going to pray that your mother is still alive and that there's some way to salvage even a piece of the woman I thought I married. Tom, if I call the police, I'll go to prison. Our children will lose their mother. Lisa, if you don't call the police, you'll still go to prison, but you'll also be a murderer. And our children will learn that their mother chose money over their grandmother's life. His voice broke slightly. At least this way, maybe they'll understand that you chose to do the right thing in the end. Lisa looked at her husband's face and saw the end of her marriage written there. Tom would never be able to look at her the same way again. Would never trust her with their children's moral education. Would never again see her as the partner he'd chosen to build a life with. But he was right. The only choice left was between being a failed murderer who'd chosen conscience over convenience, or a successful one who'd traded her soul for temporary financial relief. With shaking hands, Lisa reached for her phone and dialed 911, knowing that the next words out of her mouth would end the life she'd killed for and begin whatever came after. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report an attempted murder, Lisa whispered, looking at Tom's stricken face. I've been poisoning my mother, and I think she's going to die if someone doesn't stop us. Emily John woke at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of her front door opening. The soft click of the lock disengaging sent adrenaline coursing through her 72-year-old body with an intensity she hadn't felt since Harold's final heart attack. She'd been expecting this moment since her conversation with Detective Kowalski yesterday, the inevitable escalation when David realized his careful timeline was collapsing. Through her bedroom window, she could see David's pickup truck parked in her driveway, its engine still ticking as it cooled. No attempt at stealth this time. No pretense of a loving son making a social call. This was desperation driving action. And Emily knew with crystal clarity that she was about to face the most dangerous moments of her life. Her phone lay on the nightstand, Detective Kowalski's number programmed for speed dial. But David's footsteps were already climbing the stairs, and Emily understood that calling for help might trigger the violent confrontation she'd been hoping to avoid. Instead, she slipped Harold's old baseball bat from beneath her bed and positioned herself behind the bedroom door, drawing on reserves of courage she'd discovered only in the past week. Mom? David's voice carried through the house, artificially cheerful despite the early hour. Sorry to wake you, but I brought you something special. Something to help you sleep better. Emily's blood chilled. Sleep better. A euphemism for the final dose that would ensure she never woke up again. Just a minute, honey, she called back, her voice steadier than she'd expected. Let me put on my robe. Through the crack in her door, Emily could see David climbing the stairs with a thermal mug in his hand. Hot chocolate, probably, or warm milk. Something comforting and motherly that would mask the bitter taste of enough digitalis to stop her heart within the hour. I know it's early, David said, reaching the top of the stairs. But I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about how you haven't been eating properly. This will help settle your stomach. Emily stepped out from behind her door, the baseball bat hidden behind her back. "That's very thoughtful of you, David. But I'm curious. Why couldn't you sleep?" Something in her tone must have alerted him, because David's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Just worried about you, Mom. You seemed so distant yesterday, like you were avoiding the things Lisa and I brought you." Should I be avoiding them? The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Emily watched her son's face cycle through emotions: surprise, calculation, and finally a cold resignation that transformed his features into those of a stranger. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Emily stepped fully into the hallway, no longer bothering to hide the baseball bat. "I think you know exactly what I mean, David. Just like you know what's really in that mug you're holding." David's mask slipped completely, revealing the desperate, dangerous man beneath. "Mom, you're confused. You've been having memory problems, dizzy spells. Dr. Brennan said your heart isn't strong anymore." Dr. Brennan said no such thing. In fact, Dr. Brennan discovered something very interesting in my blood work. Would you like to know what she found? Emily watched her son's grip tighten on the thermal mug, saw his free hand clench into a fist. This was the moment of truth, when the pretense of family love collided with the reality of financial desperation. "Digitalis, David. Enough to kill me if I'd kept drinking your smoothies and eating your soup." Emily's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with difficult patrons and unruly teenagers. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think your own mother was too stupid to realize her children were poisoning her? You don't understand." David's voice cracked with frustration. "I'm going to lose everything. The business, the house. My kids won't even talk to me, because I can't pay child support. Lisa's about to lose her house too. We're drowning, Mom, and you were going to give away Dad's insurance money to some stupid scholarship fund. So you decided to kill me for it. We decided to help you die peacefully before you suffered more." The rationalization came out in a rush, as if David had been rehearsing this justification for weeks. "You've been lonely since Dad died, and your health is declining anyway. This way would have been gentle, natural. No pain, no fear." Emily stared at her son and saw a stranger wearing David's face. "Natural? David, you've been systematically poisoning me for weeks. There's nothing natural about that." It would have looked natural. Heart failure in an elderly woman isn't suspicious. You would have just gone to sleep and not woken up. The casual way he discussed her murder sent ice through Emily's veins. "And Lisa? Was this her idea or yours?" "Lisa wanted to help you too. We both love you, Mom. We just couldn't watch you waste Dad's legacy on strangers when your own children needed help. Your father's legacy was raising children who understood the difference between right and wrong. Apparently, he failed." David's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare bring Dad into this. He would have understood. He would have wanted us to be practical. Your father would have been horrified." Emily's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Harold would never have hurt someone he loved for money, and he would have been ashamed to know his children were capable of murder. It's not murder if it's merciful. The twisted logic of his statement made Emily realize just how far her son had fallen into justification and self-deception. David had convinced himself that killing his mother was an act of kindness, a mercy that served everyone's interests. "David, it's over. Detective Kowalski knows everything. Dr. Brennan has evidence. Even if you—" Emily's voice caught slightly. "Even if you killed me tonight, you'd still go to prison for murder." "You called the police?" David's face went pale. "Mom, how could you do that to your own family?" "How could I? David, you've been feeding me poison for weeks. You've been planning my death like a business transaction. And you're asking how I could protect myself?" David's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it reflexively. Emily caught a glimpse of the screen. A text from Lisa that made David's face contort with rage. "What did Lisa tell you?" Emily asked. "She told Tom. And Tom made her call the police." David's voice carried a bitterness that made Emily step backward. "My stupid sister couldn't keep her mouth shut, and now everything's ruined." "David, Put down the mug and we'll call Detective Kowalski together. You can surrender peacefully, and maybe what? Maybe I'll only get 20 years instead of life? David laughed harshly. Mom, there's no coming back from this. You've made sure of that. Emily saw the moment when her son made his final, desperate decision. His grip on the thermal mug shifted, and she realized he intended to force her to drink the poisoned contents, to complete his plan even knowing it would accomplish nothing except her death. David, don't do this. I'm your mother. You were my mother. Until you chose strangers over your own children. David lunged forward, and Emily swung Harold's old Louisville slugger with every ounce of strength in her 72-year-old body. The bat connected with David's wrist, sending the thermal mug flying and its contents splashing across the hallway walls like abstract art painted in poison. David howled in pain and rage, clutching his probably broken wrist while staring at his mother with a mixture of disbelief and fury. You hit me. I defended myself. Emily raised the bat again, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Against my own son, who was trying to murder me. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the tableau of mother and son facing each other across a hallway splattered with lethal hot chocolate. David heard them too, his face cycling through expressions of defeat, rage, and something that might have been relief. It's over, Emily said quietly. Yeah, it's over. David slumped against the wall, cradling his injured wrist. Mom, I want you to know. I really thought this was the best thing. For everyone. Emily looked at her son, her baby, the boy who'd once cried when she'd accidentally stepped on his toy soldier, and felt her heart break in ways she'd never imagined possible. David, the best thing would have been asking for help. I would have helped you. I would have given you anything you needed. We didn't want charity. We wanted what was ours. The sirens were getting closer, and Emily could see red and blue lights reflecting off her neighbor's windows. Soon her house would be filled with police officers and paramedics, her quiet coastal sanctuary transformed into a crime scene. David, when they ask you about Lisa, please tell them she tried to stop this. Tell them she called the police herself. Why would you want to help her? She was part of this too. Because she chose conscience over money in the end. And because your father would have wanted me to protect both of you if I could. David stared at his mother, perhaps seeing her clearly for the first time in weeks. You're protecting us, even now. After everything we did. I'm protecting the children I raised, not the strangers you became when money mattered more than love. The front door burst open, and Detective Kowalski's voice filled the house. Police! Mrs. John, are you all right? I'm fine, Emily called back, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. David's here. He's injured but not dangerous anymore. As the police took David into custody, Emily sat on her bed and tried to process what had just happened. She'd survived her children's attempt to murder her, but in saving her life, she'd lost her family forever. The house felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, as if the events of the past hour had fundamentally altered its molecular structure. Dr. Brennan arrived with the paramedics, immediately checking Emily for injuries while the police processed the crime scene. The spilled contents of David's thermal mug would provide final confirmation of their case, but Emily knew the evidence was already overwhelming. How do you feel? Dr. Brennan asked, taking Emily's pulse. Emily considered the question carefully. Like a woman who just discovered she's stronger than she ever knew she'd need to be. And David? Emily watched through her bedroom window as her son was loaded into a police car, his head hung in defeat. Like a stranger who used to be my child. The truth of that statement hurt more than any physical injury could have. Emily John had survived attempted murder by her own children, but the cost of that survival was the loss of the family she'd spent 50 years building and protecting. Still, as dawn broke over the Oregon coast, Emily found herself grateful to be alive to see it. Survival, she'd learned, was its own form of victory, even when it came at the highest possible price. The courtroom in Lincoln County felt smaller than Emily John had expected, its wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting creating an atmosphere more suited to municipal business than the life-altering drama unfolding within. She sat in the front row of the gallery, her hands folded carefully in her lap, watching as her son David shuffled into the defendant's chair, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his pale skin look sickly under the harsh lights. 3 months had passed since that terrible night when David had attempted to force poison down her throat. 3 months of legal proceedings, media attention, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life shattered by betrayal. Emily had testified twice already, once before the grand jury that had indicted both her children, and once during Lisa's separate trial that had concluded the previous week with a plea bargain. Today was David's sentencing hearing, the final chapter in a legal saga that had transformed Emily from victim to survivor to reluctant public figure. The attempted murder case had attracted national attention, particularly after details emerged about the sophisticated nature of the poisoning scheme and the financial pressures that had driven 2 seemingly successful adults to try killing their mother. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison," the bailiff announced. Emily stood with the rest of the courtroom, noting the irony that the judge shared a surname with Lisa's husband Tom. Life was full of such small coincidences that felt laden with meaning in the aftermath of trauma. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. Emily had researched her background obsessively, a habit carried over from her librarian days, and knew that Morrison had built her career on complex criminal cases and had a particular expertise in family violence situations. "Please be seated," the judge said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We're here today for sentencing in the matter of State of Oregon versus David Harold John, case number 2025, County Route 1847. Emily winced at the use of Harold's name as David's middle name. Her late husband had insisted on the tradition, wanting his son to carry something of his father's identity through life. Harold would have been devastated to see his name associated with attempted murder charges. David's attorney, a young public defender named Marcus Webb, who looked barely old enough to have graduated law school, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, my client wishes to make a statement before sentencing." Emily's stomach clenched. She'd been dreading this moment, uncertain whether David would express genuine remorse or continue the self-justifying narrative he'd maintained throughout the legal proceedings. David rose slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Prison had changed him. The confident swagger that had carried him through 4 decades of charm and manipulation was gone, replaced by a hollow uncertainty that made him look older than his 48 years. "Your Honor," David began, his voice barely audible in the hushed courtroom. "I want to apologize to my mother, to my sister, to my ex-wife and children, and to this court for my actions." Emily found herself leaning forward slightly, searching David's face for signs of genuine contrition. After months of legal maneuvering and psychiatric evaluations, she still wasn't certain whether her son truly understood the magnitude of what he'd done. "I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the harm I caused, doesn't erase the fear and pain I put my mother through." David's voice grew stronger as he continued. "For weeks, I told myself that what I was doing was justified, that desperate circumstances called for desperate measures. I convinced myself that my mother's death would solve problems for everyone, that it would be a mercy rather than a murder." Emily felt tears prick her eyes despite her determination to remain composed. This was the first time David had acknowledged the truth about their plan without attempting to minimize or justify it. "But I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong." David turned to face Emily directly, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since he was a child caught in mischief. Genuine shame. "Mom, you raised me to understand the difference between right and wrong. You taught me that family meant protecting each other, not hurting each other for personal gain. I betrayed everything you taught me, everything Dad would have expected from me." Emily's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly at the mention of Harold. She pressed a tissue to her eyes, aware that television cameras were recording her every reaction for the evening news. I can't ask for forgiveness because what I did is unforgivable, David continued. I can only promise that I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to understand how I became someone capable of trying to murder his own mother for money. Judge Morrison's expression remained impassive as David returned to his seat. Emily had watched enough courtroom proceedings on television to know that judicial poker faces revealed nothing about upcoming sentences, but something in the judge's bearing suggested she'd been moved by David's statement. Mr. Webb, does your client have anything else to add? No, Your Honor. Mr. John would like to enter a formal plea of guilty to all charges and accept whatever sentence the court deems appropriate. Emily's breath caught. Throughout the pretrial proceedings, David had maintained his innocence, claiming that his actions were motivated by concern for Emily's well-being rather than financial gain. This last-minute change of plea suggested something had shifted in his understanding of the situation. District Attorney Rebecca Chen rose to address the court, her movements crisp and professional. Emily had grown to respect Chen during the months of legal proceedings. The prosecutor had treated Emily with dignity while pursuing justice with unwavering determination. Your Honor, the state acknowledges Mr. John's apparent remorse, but we cannot ignore the calculated nature of his crimes. The evidence shows that Mr. John spent weeks researching digitalis poisoning, carefully calibrating doses to avoid detection, and systematically administering poison to his mother over a period of approximately 2 months. Chen pulled out a thick folder of documents. Mr. John's internet search history reveals queries about inheritance law, life insurance payouts, and methods for extracting cardiac glycosides from foxglove plants. His phone records show coordination with his sister Lisa regarding timing of visits and food deliveries. This was not a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was premeditated, attempted murder motivated by financial gain. Emily listened to the clinical recitation of evidence and felt disconnected from the proceedings, as if Chen were describing crimes committed by strangers rather than her own children. The transformation of family meals and loving gestures into murder weapons still felt surreal 3 months later. Furthermore, Chen continued, the psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Amanda Rodriguez suggests that Mr. John suffers from antisocial personality traits that make him a significant risk for future criminal behavior. Dr. Rodriguez noted Mr. John's ability to rationalize harmful actions and his demonstrated willingness to prioritize personal gain over the welfare of family members. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The psychiatric evaluation had revealed aspects of David's personality that she'd either missed or chosen to ignore during 48 years of motherhood. According to Dr. Rodriguez, David displayed classic signs of narcissistic entitlement and an inability to form genuine empathetic connections, traits that had probably contributed to his failed business ventures and troubled relationships. The state recommends a sentence of 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for 15 years, Chen concluded. This sentence reflects both the severity of Mr. John's crimes and the need to protect society from someone who has demonstrated a willingness to commit violence against vulnerable family members. Emily closed her eyes as the weight of those words settled over her. 25 years would likely mean David would spend the rest of his productive adult life in prison. He would be in his 70s before becoming eligible for parole, older than Emily was now. Judge Morrison consulted her notes before speaking. Mr. John, please stand. David rose, his hands clasped behind his back in the position he'd probably learned from other inmates during his months in county jail awaiting trial. Mr. John, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered a case that has disturbed me as profoundly as this one, Judge Morrison began. The systematic poisoning of an elderly parent represents a fundamental violation of the most basic human bonds. Your mother trusted you with her life, and you used that trust as a weapon against her. Emily felt the weight of every person in the courtroom watching her reaction. She'd become an unwilling public figure, the face of elder abuse awareness campaigns, and the subject of magazine articles about family violence. Strangers approached her on the street to express sympathy or share their own stories of betrayal by loved ones. However, the judge continued, I am also mindful of your apparent genuine remorse and your willingness to accept responsibility for your actions. Your change of plea spares your mother the trauma of a lengthy trial and demonstrates at least some consideration for her welfare. Quote. Judge Morrison paused, and Emily found herself holding her breath. Mr. John, I hereby sentence you to 20 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary, with eligibility for parole after serving 12 years. This sentence is contingent upon your completion of psychological counseling and your participation in restorative justice programs designed to help you understand the impact of your crimes. Emily felt a complex mixture of relief and sorrow. 20 years was less than the prosecution had requested, but it was still effectively a life sentence for any meaningful relationship between mother and son. David would be nearly 70 when he became eligible for parole, and Emily would likely be dead or too elderly to navigate the complex emotions involved in potential reconciliation. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, you are permanently prohibited from contacting your mother directly or indirectly without her explicit written consent. Any attempt to circumvent this order will result in additional criminal charges. Emily understood the necessity of the no-contact order, but it still felt like a door closing on the last remnants of their family relationship. David was legally forbidden from apologizing to her, from explaining his actions, from attempting to repair the damage he'd caused. As the bailiffs led David away in shackles, he turned to look at Emily one final time. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Emily saw her little boy, the child who'd brought her dandelions and construction paper Mother's Day cards, who'd cried when she'd been late picking him up from school, who'd hugged her fiercely after Harold's funeral, and promised he'd always take care of her. That child was gone now, replaced by a convicted felon, who would spend the next 2 decades learning to live with the consequences of choosing money over love. After the courtroom emptied, Emily found herself alone in the hallway with Detective Ray Kowalski and Dr. Sarah Brennan, the 2 people who had probably saved her life through their vigilance and professional competence. How are you feeling? Dr. Brennan asked, the same question she'd posed after every court appearance. Empty, Emily replied honestly. I know justice was served, but it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like everyone lost. That's normal, Detective Kowalski said. Family violence cases don't have winners, just different degrees of loss. You're alive, and that's what matters most. Emily nodded, but she wasn't sure she entirely agreed. Survival felt hollow when it came at the cost of everything she'd spent her life building and protecting. The 3 of them walked toward the courthouse exit, where Emily knew a small crowd of reporters would be waiting for her statement. She'd become adept at managing media attention, understanding that her story served a purpose beyond personal catharsis. It educated people about elder abuse and encouraged other victims to seek help. Mrs. John! A reporter thrust a microphone toward her as soon as she emerged into the afternoon sunlight. How do you feel about your son's sentence? Emily paused, considering her words carefully. I feel that justice has been served, and I hope my son uses his time in prison to understand how he became someone capable of such actions. Do you forgive him? The question she'd been dreading for months. Emily looked directly into the camera, knowing her answer would be replayed on news programs across the country. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. Right now I'm focused on healing and moving forward with my life. Perhaps someday forgiveness will be possible, but today is about accepting that the David who raised me and the David who tried to kill me are somehow the same person, and learning to live with that reality. What about your daughter Lisa? Emily's expression softened slightly. Lisa's case had been resolved more quietly, her cooperation with authorities and genuine remorse earning her a reduced sentence of 5 years with eligibility for parole after 3. More importantly, Lisa had maintained her relationship with Tom and her children, who were receiving counseling to help them understand and process their mother's actions. Lisa made a terrible choice, but she also found the courage to choose conscience over convenience when it mattered most. Her decision to contact the authorities probably saved my life and certainly prevented her from becoming a murderer, rather than just an attempted murderer. Will you have a relationship with her after she serves her sentence? I don't know, Emily answered honestly. That decision will depend on many factors, including whether she's genuinely changed and whether I'm emotionally capable of rebuilding trust with someone who once tried to kill me. As the reporters dispersed, Emily found herself standing on the courthouse steps with Dr. Brennan and Detective Kowalski. 3 people bound together by circumstances none of them had chosen, but all had navigated with dignity and courage. "What happens now?" Emily asked. "Now you go home and continue building the life you started 3 months ago," Dr. Brennan replied. "The life where you're not a victim anymore, just a survivor who happened to have an experience that can help other people." Emily nodded, thinking about the elder abuse prevention programs she'd begun volunteering with, the speaking engagements that had emerged from her story, the strange sense of purpose that had grown from tragedy. The drive home to her coastal house felt different than it had 3 months ago. The building looked the same, surrounded by Harold's carefully planted gardens and the expansive view of the Pacific Ocean. But Emily's relationship with the space had fundamentally changed. It was no longer just the home where she'd raised her family. It was the place where she'd survived attempted murder and learned to rebuild her understanding of love, trust, and family bonds. Ellen Martinez was waiting on Emily's front porch, a bottle of wine in her hands and the kind of warm smile that had sustained Emily through the darkest months of her life. "How did it go?" Ellen asked. 20 years for David. Lisa's already serving her sentence." Emily unlocked her front door and gestured Ellen inside. "It's over." "No," Ellen said gently. "It's beginning. The legal part is over, but the healing part is just starting." They sat in Emily's living room as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors. Emily looked around the space where David and Lisa had plotted her death, where she'd discovered their betrayal, where she'd fought for her life with Harold's old baseball bat. "Ellen, do you think I failed as a mother?" The question had haunted Emily for months. Somewhere in the process of raising David and Lisa, she'd obviously missed something crucial. Some fundamental lesson about the value of life over money, about the sanctity of family bonds, about the difference between entitlement and need. "Honey, you raised 2 children who became adults capable of making their own choices," Ellen replied. "Some of those choices were terrible, but that doesn't make you responsible for them. You taught them right from wrong. They chose to ignore those lessons when it became convenient." Emily sipped the wine Ellen had poured and tried to accept the truth of that statement. She'd spent 40 years modeling integrity, compassion, and moral courage for her children. Their decision to prioritize money over her life wasn't a failure of her parenting, it was a failure of their character. "What do I do with all this anger?" Emily asked. "I love them, but I also hate what they did. How do I reconcile those feelings?" "Maybe you don't have to," Ellen suggested. "Maybe loving the children they were and hating the adults they became are both valid responses to an impossible situation." As evening approached, Emily found herself standing at her kitchen window, looking out at the ocean that had witnessed every significant moment of her adult life. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama and family tragedy. There was something comforting about that indifference, a reminder that life continued regardless of individual pain or loss. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Brennan. "Thinking of you today. Remember that surviving is just the first step. Living well is the goal." Emily smiled, recognizing the wisdom in those words. She'd survived David and Lisa's attempt to murder her, but survival wasn't enough. She needed to build a life that honored both the love she'd shared with her children and the strength she discovered in herself when that love was weaponized against her. The next chapter of Emily John's life was beginning, and for the first time in months, she felt genuinely excited about what it might contain. 6 months after David's sentencing, Emily John stood before 40 elderly residents at Sunset Manor, her voice steady as she held the microphone. The faces looking back at her were weathered by age, but their eyes held sharp intelligence, people who understood that wisdom often came disguised as hardship. "My name is Emily John," she began. 6 months ago, I was exactly where many of you are. A widow living alone, trusting my adult children to help me navigate aging. I never imagined that trust would nearly cost me my life." The room fell silent with the focused attention Emily remembered from her best library programs. These weren't passive listeners. They were people who understood the information she was sharing might literally save their lives. Today I want to talk about something no one likes to discuss: the signs that your own family members might be taking advantage of you. Emily had given this presentation dozens of times, but each audience brought new questions and stories that reminded her how widespread elder abuse had become. After explaining the warning signs she'd missed, sudden interest in finances, controlling medications, isolating from friends, she opened the floor to questions. "My son wants me to add his name to my bank accounts," an elderly man said. "Says it'll make things easier." Emily's heart clenched with recognition. That's exactly how financial abuse often begins. There are legal alternatives that protect your interests while still allowing emergency access. After the presentation, a tiny woman named Margaret approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son has been asking me to sign papers I don't understand." Emily knelt beside Margaret's chair. "You have the right to understand every document you sign. Take them to an independent attorney for review. If your son objects, it's probably a sign something isn't right. But he'll be angry if I don't trust him." "Honey, protecting yourself isn't a betrayal of family love. Real love doesn't require blind trust, especially when money is involved." As Emily packed up, Dr. Sarah Brennan appeared. Their relationship had evolved far beyond physician and patient. Sarah had become one of Emily's closest friends and advocacy partners. How did it go? 3 people asked for attorney referrals. I call that successful. Emily's phone rang as they walked to the parking lot. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. John? This is Warden Patricia Williams from Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. I'm calling about your daughter, Lisa. She's asked to write you a letter as part of our Victim Impact Program. A letter taking full responsibility for her actions. She wanted your permission first." Emily closed her eyes, processing the complex emotions Lisa's name still triggered. "I'll need to think about it." "Of course. If you decide you're interested, I can arrange for the letter to be sent through Dr. Brennan." Later that evening, Emily sat in Harold's old reading chair, surrounded by thank you notes from presentation attendees and letters from other elder abuse survivors. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom Morrison. "Kids ask about you sometimes. Would you be interested in supervised visits once Lisa's released?" No pressure. Emily stared at the message, thinking about her teenage grandchildren caught in the crossfire of their mother's choices. She typed back, "Thank you for thinking of me. I'm not ready yet, but I appreciate knowing the possibility exists." Emily looked out at the Pacific Ocean, its surface reflecting sunset in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow she would call Warden Williams and ask to receive Lisa's letter. Not because she was ready to forgive, but because she was strong enough to face whatever her daughter might have to say. Emily John had survived attempted murder by her own children. But more importantly, she discovered that survival was just the beginning. The real victory lay in building a life that honored both the love she'd given her family and the strength she'd found within herself. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama but somehow comforting in their consistency. Emily finished her tea, grateful for another day of life and curious about what tomorrow might bring. 6 months ago, she'd been a victim. Tonight, she was simply Emily John, survivor, advocate, and a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most profound transformations came disguised as the worst possible tragedies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,